Before we begin this unforgettable journey, I want to know, where are you joining us from today? Are you tuning in from the heart of a busy city or the peace of a small town? Share your location in the comments below. And if you're ready for a story that will stir every emotion in you, make sure to hit that subscribe button and give this video a like. The November rain hammered against the floor-to-ceiling windows of Sterling Tower, creating rivers of distortion that transformed the Seattle skyline into an impressionist painting. Robert Sterling stood in his 47th floor office, signing the last of the day's contracts while the city below prepared for midnight. At 52, he commanded an empire worth $14 billion. But tonight, like most nights, he was the last soul in the executive suite, surrounded by the ghosts of deals made and relationships lost. His phone buzzed with a security alert from the parking garage. Robert almost ignored it. The system was oversensitive, often triggered by delivery trucks or maintenance crews. But something made him glance at the monitor on his desk. 3 figures surrounded someone near the service elevator, their body language aggressive, predatory. Robert enhanced the image, and his blood chilled. The person being cornered was Grace Winters, the night janitor who'd started 6 months ago. Without thinking, he grabbed his phone and ran for the stairs, his Italian leather shoes slipping on the polished marble as he descended into the depths of the building, where a young woman's terrified screams were about to change both their lives forever. Robert burst through the garage door to find Grace pressed against a concrete pillar, her cleaning cart overturned, industrial supplies scattered across the oil-stained floor. The 3 men surrounding her turned at his entrance, their faces partially hidden by hoodies, but their intentions clear in their aggressive stances. "Back away from her. Now," Robert commanded, his voice echoing with an authority that had cowed CEOs and world leaders. The largest attacker laughed, pulling something metallic from his pocket that caught the harsh fluorescent light. "Mind your business, old man," the attacker sneered. "This doesn't concern you." Robert moved forward, muscle memory from his military days 30 years ago awakening in his body. "Everything in this building concerns me. I'm Robert Sterling, and you're on my property, threatening my employee. Security is already on the way. Leave now, and we forget this happened." The men exchanged glances, calculating odds. Grace's green eyes met Robert's across the chaos, and something in that brief connection, familiar yet impossible, made him grab a mop handle from the scattered supplies. "If you want her, you go through me first." The violence erupted with shocking speed. The first attacker rushed Robert, who swung the mop handle in a wide arc, catching the man's shoulder and sending him spinning into a parked car. The second man circled, looking for an opening, while the third kept Grace cornered. Robert's dress shirt tore as he grappled with the second attacker, his knuckles splitting against the concrete wall when he missed a punch. Years of boardroom battles hadn't prepared him for this, but something primal, protective, drove him forward. Grace suddenly came alive, grabbing a bottle of industrial cleaner from the ground and spraying it directly into the third attacker's eyes. The man screamed, clawing at his face, stumbling backward. "You little—" he started, but Robert had broken free from his opponent and tackled him to the ground. The sound of approaching sirens finally scattered the attackers, who fled through the exit, leaving Robert breathing hard with a split lip and Grace trembling but unharmed. As Robert helped her to a bench, his hand touching hers for the first time, neither of them could have imagined that this moment of violence would unravel secrets 26 years in the making. "Are you hurt?" Robert asked, pulling out his handkerchief to dab at his bleeding lip while examining Grace for injuries. She shook her head, but her whole body trembled like a leaf in a storm. Up close, under the harsh garage lights, he could see she was younger than he'd thought. Maybe 25 or 26. There was something about the shape of her jaw, the way she tucked a strand of auburn hair behind her ear with shaking fingers, that tugged at his memory like a half-remembered dream. "They've been following me for weeks," Grace said, her voice barely above a whisper. "My ex-boyfriend owes them money. They think I have it, but I don't. I never did." She looked up at him then, those green eyes catching the light, and Robert felt the world tilt slightly. "Thank you, Mr. Sterling. You didn't have to risk yourself for a janitor." The way she said it, with a mixture of gratitude and bitter self-awareness, made his chest tighten. "You're not just a janitor," he said firmly. "You're a person who deserved help. And you work for me, which makes you under my protection." The police took statements while paramedics checked them both for injuries. Robert refused a trip to the hospital despite his split lip and bruised ribs, more concerned with ensuring Grace was safe. He arranged for a security guard to follow her home and insisted she take the next few days off with pay. "I can't afford to miss work," she protested weakly, and something in her tone reminded him of another stubborn woman from long ago, who'd rather struggle than accept help. As Grace gathered her things to leave with the security escort, she paused at the garage door. "Mr. Sterling, why were you here so late?" Robert considered lying, saying he always worked late, but something about the night's events demanded honesty. "I don't sleep well," he admitted. "Haven't for years." "Work fills the empty hours." Grace nodded as if she understood that particular brand of loneliness. "Me too. Good night, Mr. Sterling. And thank you again." After she left, Robert stood in the empty garage, blood drying on his shirt, wondering why saving this particular employee felt like the first meaningful thing he'd done in years. Robert didn't sleep that night. He sat in his penthouse apartment, nursing a glass of whiskey and a growing collection of bruises while rain continued its assault on the windows. Grace's eyes haunted him, green like spring grass with gold flecks that caught the light. He'd seen those eyes before, 27 years ago, in a cramped Boston apartment where love had turned to resentment and dreams had shattered against the rocky shore of ambition. Melissa Parker had been his everything once. They'd met at MIT, two brilliant minds drawn together by shared ambition and explosive chemistry. She'd been studying biochemistry while he pursued computer engineering, and they'd spent long nights in the library, building their futures together. They married right after graduation, in a small ceremony that felt like the beginning of forever. But forever, Robert had learned, was a concept that couldn't survive the collision between two people's incompatible dreams. When the opportunity came to move to Silicon Valley, to join a startup that would eventually become Sterling Industries, Melissa had begged him to stay in Boston. She had her own career, her family, a life she'd built. The arguments that followed had been vicious, each convinced the other was being selfish, until finally she'd served him with divorce papers and disappeared from his life entirely. Grace didn't take the days off. She arrived for her shift the next evening, moving stiffly but determinedly through her routine. Robert watched from his office security monitor as she methodically cleaned the executive floor, and found himself taking the elevator down to accidentally encounter her. "Miss Winters, I thought I told you to take time off," he said, trying to sound stern but mostly sounding concerned. "With respect, Mr. Sterling, I need this job," Grace replied, not stopping her work. "I have bills to pay, and sitting at home jumping at every noise isn't going to help me heal." She paused in her mopping to look at him directly. "Besides, this is the safest place I could be. You've made sure of that." It was true. Robert had tripled security in the building and specifically assigned a guard to monitor the floors where Grace worked. "At least let me buy you dinner," he said impulsively. "You must be hungry, and the cafeteria's closed." Grace hesitated, clearly wrestling with professional boundaries, before her stomach growled audibly. "Okay," she said with a small smile that transformed her serious face, "but somewhere cheap. I don't want to feel indebted." They ended up at an all-night diner 6 blocks from Sterling Tower, a place Robert hadn't even known existed, despite working in the area for 15 years. Grace seemed to relax in the vinyl booth, ordering coffee and a sandwich, while Robert nursed his own coffee and tried not to stare at the way she smiled at the elderly waitress. "You know this place," he observed, and Grace nodded. "I come here on breaks sometimes. Rosie, the waitress, she's been kind to me since I started at Sterling. Gives me free pie when she thinks I look too thin." Grace paused, seeming to debate something internally. "Can I ask you something, Mr. Sterling? Why did you really help me last night?" "You could have just called security from your office." Robert considered his answer carefully. "Honestly, I don't know. When I saw you surrounded, something in me just reacted, like I couldn't not help you." He studied her face in the diner's warm light. "You remind me of someone I knew a long time ago. Someone I failed to protect. Tell me about yourself," Robert said, surprising himself with how much he wanted to know. "How does someone end up working night shifts as a janitor?" "No judgment, just curiosity." Grace wrapped her hands around her coffee mug, seeming to draw strength from its warmth. "It's not a very interesting story. My mom raised me alone in Portland. She died 3 years ago, cancer. The medical bills took everything. And then some." "I'm sorry," Robert said, meaning it. "That must have been incredibly difficult." Grace nodded, her eyes distant. "She was everything to me. Brilliant, funny, stubborn as hell. She worked 2 jobs to put me through college, then got sick right after I graduated. The universe has a cruel sense of timing." She looked up at him suddenly. "What about you? You said I remind you of someone." Robert felt his chest tighten. "My ex-wife. You have similar eyes, a similar way of carrying yourself. She was stubborn too, and brilliant. We divorced 27 years ago, and I never saw her again. Over the next few weeks, a routine developed. Robert would happen to work late when Grace was on shift, and they'd end up talking during her breaks. He learned that she'd studied mathematics at Portland State, that she spoke 3 languages, that she'd turned down a graduate school scholarship to care for her dying mother. She was funny in a dry, observational way that caught him off guard and made him laugh for the first time in months. "You're wasting your talents," he told her one night, as she corrected an error in a financial projection he'd left on his whiteboard. "You should be running analyses, not emptying trash bins." Grace shrugged, but he caught a flash of longing in her eyes. "Life doesn't always give us what we deserve, Mr. Sterling. Sometimes it just gives us what we need to survive, and we make do." She paused, then added quietly, "My mom used to say I got my math brain from my father. Never met him, but apparently he was some kind of genius who chose his career over family." The words hit Robert like a physical blow, but before he could respond, Grace had already moved on to the next office. Robert found himself thinking about Grace constantly. Not romantically. The thought never even crossed his mind, but with a protective concern that bordered on obsession. He ran background checks, learning that Grace Rebecca Winters had been born in Boston 26 years ago, 7 months after his divorce from Melissa was finalized. The timeline made his hands shake as he held the report. He pulled up old photos of Melissa on his computer, images he'd hidden in a password-protected folder but never deleted. The resemblance to Grace was undeniable once he looked for it. The same delicate bone structure, the same way of tilting her head when thinking, the same stubborn set to her jaw when she was determined. But it couldn't be. Melissa would have told him if she'd been pregnant. She wouldn't have hidden something that monumental. Would she? Unable to sleep, Robert hired a private investigator to find out what had happened to Melissa Parker after their divorce. What he discovered over the next week shattered his world. Melissa had changed her name to Melissa Winters, her mother's maiden name, and moved to Portland when Grace was 10. She'd built a small accounting firm, raised her daughter alone, and died of ovarian cancer 3 years ago, just as Grace had said. The investigator had found Melissa's obituary, which mentioned she was survived by her daughter, Grace Rebecca Winters, and included a photo from happier times. Robert stared at that photo for hours. Melissa and Grace, at what looked like Grace's college graduation, both smiling brilliantly at the camera. Grace was wearing a cap and gown, holding her diploma, while Melissa, thin from early cancer treatments but still beautiful, held her daughter with fierce pride. The caption read, "She did it all alone. And I couldn't be prouder." M.W. Robert realized with crushing certainty that all alone meant without him. "You look terrible," Miranda Hayes, Robert's CFO and closest friend, told him bluntly during their weekly meeting. "What's going on?" "And don't say nothing. I've known you for 15 years. Robert rubbed his face, feeling every one of his 52 years. "Miranda, if you discovered you might have a child you never knew about, what would you do?" Miranda set down her coffee cup carefully. "Is this about the janitor you've been spending time with? HR mentioned you've been taking an unusual interest in her welfare." Robert nodded, then told Miranda everything. The attack, the resemblance to Melissa, the timeline that suggested the impossible. Miranda listened without interrupting, her expression growing more concerned with each revelation. "You need to find out for certain," she said finally. "But Robert, be careful. If she is your daughter, she's been living with this secret for a reason. Maybe she doesn't know, or maybe she does, and chose not to tell you. Either way, this could destroy both of you if handled wrong." Robert's investigation was put on hold when Grace didn't show up for her shift. This was unprecedented. In 6 months, she'd never missed a day. When she didn't answer her phone, Robert did something he'd never done before. He went to her apartment. The building was a run-down complex in a rough part of town, the kind of place where the stairs creaked ominously and the hallway lights flickered like a horror movie. He found her apartment and knocked. No answer. He knocked harder, calling her name until an elderly neighbor poked her head out. "She's sick," the woman said. "Heard her throwing up all night." "Poor thing lives alone, no one to help her." Robert didn't hesitate. He convinced the building manager to open the door for a welfare check and found Grace curled on her bathroom floor, burning with fever and barely conscious. "Grace, it's Robert. I'm taking you to the hospital." She mumbled something that might have been a protest, but was too weak to resist as he carefully lifted her and carried her to his car. The emergency room doctors diagnosed Grace with severe food poisoning complicated by dehydration and exhaustion. As they hooked her up to IVs and monitors, Robert found himself unable to leave. He called Miranda to clear his schedule, then settled into the uncomfortable chair beside Grace's bed. She looked so young and vulnerable lying there, and Robert felt a fierce protectiveness that went beyond employer concern. Grace woke up hours later, disoriented and confused. "Mr. Sterling?" "What? Where am I?" "The hospital," Robert said gently. "You were very sick. The doctors say you'll be fine, but you need rest and fluids." Grace tried to sit up, panic in her eyes. I can't afford this. I don't have good insurance. It's taken care of, Robert interrupted. Don't worry about anything except getting better. Grace stared at him for a long moment, tears forming in her eyes. Why are you so kind to me? She whispered. I'm nobody to you. The words you might be everything caught in Robert's throat. Instead, he said, you're not nobody. You're Grace Winters, and you matter. As Grace recovered over the next 2 days, Robert barely left the hospital. They talked during her waking hours, and he worked on his laptop while she slept. On the second night, perhaps weakened by illness or touched by his kindness, Grace made a confession that changed everything. I lied to you, she said quietly, staring at the ceiling. About not having an interesting story. Robert set aside his laptop, giving her his full attention. What do you mean? Grace turned to look at him, those green eyes filled with an emotion he couldn't identify. I know who you are. Not just as Robert Sterling, the CEO. I know who you are to me. Robert's heart stopped, then resumed at double speed. Grace, my mother was Melissa Parker, she said, tears streaming down her face. She was pregnant when you divorced. She never told you because she didn't want to trap you, didn't want to be the reason you gave up your dreams. She loved you that much. Robert felt the world spin around him. 26 years of lost time crashed over him like a tsunami. You're my daughter, he breathed. Not a question, but a recognition of truth. Grace nodded, wiping at her tears. I've known since I was 16. Mom told me when she first got sick. In case she didn't make it. She did, that time, but the cancer came back. Why didn't you tell me? Robert's voice cracked with emotion he couldn't contain. When you started working at Sterling, why didn't you say something? Grace laughed bitterly. Hi, I'm your secret daughter. Can I have a job? How would that have looked? I needed work, not charity. I wanted to see who you were, understand why Mom loved you so much that losing you broke something in her that never healed. But I was going to leave without telling you. Then those men attacked me, and you saved me, and everything got complicated. They sat in silence for a long moment, 26 years of absence filling the space between them. Finally, Robert spoke, his voice rough with unshed tears. I tried to find her. 5 years after the divorce, I hired investigators. Her family said she'd moved to Europe, wanted no contact. If I'd known about you... I know, Grace said softly. Mom told me that too at the end. She said she'd made a terrible mistake, that her pride had cost us both. She wanted to reach out so many times, but the longer it went, the harder it became. Robert moved to sit on the edge of her bed, hesitantly taking her hand. Grace didn't pull away. Tell me about her, about your life. I want to know everything I missed. So Grace talked, her voice growing stronger, as she painted pictures of birthday parties in tiny apartments, of science fairs where she'd wished for a father to see her projects, of Melissa working 2 jobs, but always making time for bedtime stories about a brilliant man who was changing the world somewhere far away. We should do a DNA test, Grace said practically the next morning. Not that I doubt Mom, but you deserve certainty. Robert nodded, though in his heart he already knew. The resemblance, the timeline, the way he'd felt drawn to protect her from the first moment. It all made sense now. The test was arranged quickly, with results rushed through Robert's connections. While they waited, Robert brought Grace home from the hospital to his penthouse to recover properly. She protested, but he insisted. You're my daughter, Grace. Confirmed or not, I know it. Let me take care of you the way I should have been able to all along. The penthouse overwhelmed her, 20 times the size of her studio apartment with views that stretched to the mountains. "This is too much," she whispered. "No," Robert said firmly. 26 years of absence was too much. This is just a beginning. The DNA results arrive 3 days later, 99.9% probability of paternity. Robert stared at the paper that confirmed what his heart already knew, while Grace made coffee in his kitchen with hands that shook slightly. "So it's official," she said quietly. "You're my father." The words hung in the air between them, foreign and familiar at once. Robert set down the papers and crossed to her, stopping just short of touching. "May I hug you?" he asked, his voice breaking. "I haven't held my daughter since—" "I've never held my daughter." Grace's composure crumbled, and she fell into his arms, both of them crying for all the years lost, all the moments stolen by pride and misunderstanding. They stood there in the morning light of the penthouse, father and daughter finally united, while the city below went about its business, unaware that 2 lives had just fundamentally changed. The next weeks were a delicate dance of discovery. Grace returned to her apartment despite Robert's protests, needing space to process everything, but they met for coffee every morning before her shifts, slowly building a relationship that should have had 26 years of foundation. Robert learned that Grace loved astronomy, had a secret passion for terrible reality TV, and could solve complex mathematical equations in her head faster than he could on a calculator. Grace discovered that her father, the intimidating billionaire, was actually shy in personal situations, had a weakness for chocolate chip cookies, and kept every award and accolade not in his office but in a closet, as if success embarrassed him. "Mom said you were different when you were young," Grace mentioned one morning. "Idealistic," she said. "Wanted to change the world." Robert stirred his coffee thoughtfully. "I did change the world, just not the way I'd planned. Somewhere along the way, I forgot that changing the world meant nothing if you had no one to share it with." Robert knew he had to tell his board of directors about Grace. The secret wouldn't keep, and he wanted to control the narrative. He scheduled a special meeting, asking Grace to attend despite her reluctance. "They need to see you," he explained, "to understand that you're not some gold digger appearing out of nowhere, but my daughter who never asked for anything." The boardroom was intimidating, all glass and chrome and serious faces. Robert stood at the head of the table, Grace beside him in a borrowed suit that made her look young and uncomfortable. "Gentlemen and ladies," Robert began, "I have a personal announcement that affects the future of Sterling Industries." He told them everything. Melissa, the hidden pregnancy, Grace working as a janitor, the attack that had brought them together. The board listened in stunned silence. "This is highly irregular," board member Harrison Pike said, his skepticism evident. "A daughter appearing after 26 years? How convenient, just when you're considering succession planning." Grace's face flushed with anger, but before she could speak, Robert's voice cut through like ice. "Mr. Pike, I'd remind you that Grace has been working here for 6 months as a janitor. She never revealed her identity, never asked for special treatment. If anyone has questions about her character, I'd suggest they examine their own—" "What does this mean for the company?" asked Patricia Huang more diplomatically. "It means," Robert said, "that Sterling Industries has an heir. Grace will be joining the company in a capacity suited to her skills, which are considerable. She has a mathematics degree and has been correcting errors in our financial projections while cleaning offices." He turned to Grace. "Would you like to say something?" Grace stood, her nervousness transforming into determination. I didn't seek out my father for money or position. I've supported myself since my mother died. I'm not here for handouts. If I work for Sterling Industries, I'll earn my position like anyone else." The news leaked within days, as Robert had known it would. Billionaire's secret daughter discovered working as janitor screamed the headlines. Paparazzi appeared outside Grace's apartment building and Sterling Tower. The story was irresistible. Rags to riches, hidden identity, the American dream wrapped in family drama. Grace hated every second of it. "This is why Mom never told you," she said bitterly one evening, after being chased by photographers. She knew this would happen. Our private pain becoming public entertainment. Robert hired security for her, moved her to a more secure apartment despite her protests, but the attention continued. Talk shows wanted interviews. Magazines offered huge sums for exclusive stories. Through it all, Grace maintained her dignity, refusing to speak to the media, continuing to work her janitorial shifts even as the world watched. "This is ridiculous," Robert finally said, after 2 weeks of media circus. "You can't keep cleaning offices while being followed by photographers." Grace set her jaw stubbornly. "I'm not quitting. I won't let them win. I'm not asking you to quit," Robert said carefully. "I'm offering you a different position. Junior analyst in our strategic planning department. It's entry level, which I know you'll insist on, but it uses your actual skills." Grace considered this. "Will people think you're giving me special treatment?" "Probably," Robert admitted, "but they'll think that no matter what you do. At least this way you can prove them wrong with your work rather than your mop." The comment surprised a laugh out of Grace. "Mom always said you could be funny when you wanted to be. Your mother brought out the best in me," Robert said softly. "Until I let ambition bring out the worst." Grace's first day as a junior analyst was carefully orchestrated. Robert stayed away, letting her find her own footing. Her supervisor, Thomas Chen, had been briefed on the situation but promised to treat her like any other entry-level employee. What Thomas quickly discovered was that Grace was definitely not like any other entry-level employee. Her analysis of market trends was brilliant, her mathematical models innovative, and her work ethic punishing. "She's remarkable," Thomas told Robert after Grace's first week. "If she wasn't your daughter, I'd be fast-tracking her for promotion already." Robert felt pride swell in his chest, but kept his expression neutral. "Treat her exactly as you would anyone else with her performance," he said. "She'll accept nothing less." Meanwhile, Grace was proving herself in other ways, earning her colleagues' respect through competence rather than connections. She brought coffee for everyone, stayed late to help with projects, and never once mentioned her relationship to the CEO. One evening, Grace brought Robert a box she'd been keeping in storage. "Mom's things," she explained. I thought you might want to see some of them." Inside were photographs Robert had never seen. Melissa pregnant, Grace as a baby, birthdays and Christmases, and ordinary moments that seemed extraordinary now. At the bottom was an envelope with Robert's name in Melissa's handwriting. With shaking hands, Robert opened it. "My dearest Robert," the letter began, "if you're reading this, then Grace has found you. And I've finally found the courage to confess my greatest mistake through her. I was pregnant when we divorced. I never told you because I thought I was setting you free, but I realize now I was just a coward, afraid of being rejected, afraid of being a burden. Our daughter is brilliant and beautiful, and has your mind and my stubbornness. Love her for both of us. She deserves the father I denied her. All my love, always, Melissa." Robert and Grace began a tradition of Sunday dinners, trying to build the relationship they'd never had. These dinners were awkward at first. filled with long silences and careful conversation. But gradually they found their rhythm. Grace told stories about Melissa, giving Robert glimpses of the woman he'd loved and lost. Robert shared his own memories, the good times before ambition poisoned everything. "She kept your picture," Grace admitted one Sunday, "hidden in her jewelry box. But I found it when I was 12. When I asked about it, she said you were someone who had been important once. I knew there was more to the story, but she wouldn't elaborate until she got sick." Robert pulled out his phone, showing Grace a hidden folder of photos. "I kept hers too. Could never bring myself to delete them, even during my second marriage." "You were married again?" Grace asked, surprised. "Briefly. A nice woman named Patricia. We're still friends, but there was no passion. I think I used up all my passion with your mother." Grace's past wasn't done with her yet. Her ex-boyfriend, Trevor, was released from jail and immediately started causing problems. He showed up at Sterling Tower, demanding money, claiming Grace owed him for emotional damages. Security removed him, but he kept coming back, each time more aggressive. Robert wanted to handle it with lawyers and restraining orders, but Grace had other ideas. "I need to face him myself," she said. "With security present, but this is my battle." Robert reluctantly agreed, and Grace met Trevor in the building's lobby with guards nearby. "You owe me," Trevor snarled. "You're rich now, playing princess with daddy's money." Grace stood tall, her voice carrying across the marble lobby. "I owe you nothing. You chose crime. You chose violence. You chose to send those men after me. Every consequence you're facing is your own doing. Leave now, and don't come back, or I'll press charges for harassment and stalking." Trevor left, but the threat lingered in the air like smoke. At a charity gala, Robert introduced Grace to Catherine Walsh, one of the most powerful women in tech. Catherine took an immediate interest in Grace, recognizing the sharp intelligence behind the uncertain social manner. "Your daughter is impressive," Catherine told Robert later. "If you ever let her go, I'll snatch her up for my company immediately." The comment should have made Robert proud, but instead it filled him with panic. The thought of Grace leaving, of losing her again after just finding her, was unbearable, but he also knew he couldn't cage her, couldn't make the same mistake Melissa had accused him of, putting his needs above others. "If she wants to leave, I won't stop her," he told Catherine, the words costing him. "But I hope I can give her reasons to stay." After 6 months as a junior analyst, Grace's work had caught the attention of the entire strategic planning department. Her analysis of emerging markets had saved the company millions, and her predictive models were more accurate than systems that had cost hundreds of thousands to develop. Thomas Chen recommended her for promotion, not knowing how Robert would react. "She's earned it," Thomas said firmly. "If you say no because she's your daughter, that's reverse nepotism, and equally unfair." Robert called Grace to his office, maintaining professional distance at work. "Thomas wants to promote you to senior analyst. The board will think it's favoritism." Grace lifted her chin. "Is it? No. Your work speaks for itself. Then let them think what they want. I'll prove them wrong every day." Robert signed the promotion papers, pride and worry warring in his chest. Grace proposed an idea that surprised Robert, a family foundation focused on helping single parents pursue education while supporting their children. "Mom would have loved this," she explained. "She always said the hardest part wasn't the poverty. It was the isolation, the feeling that no one understood the juggling act of being everything to a child while trying to better yourself." Robert embraced the idea enthusiastically, putting up the initial funding and making Grace the director, It was the first thing they'd built together, and it felt like healing. The foundation's first recipient was a single mother studying engineering while working 2 jobs. When she cried at receiving the scholarship, Grace cried too, seeing her mother in this stranger's struggle. Robert's ex-wife Patricia came to Seattle on business and insisted on meeting Grace. "I need to see the daughter you should have had with me," she said with characteristic bluntness. The dinner was surprisingly pleasant. Patricia was warm and funny, treating Grace like a niece she'd always known existed. "I always knew there was someone else in your heart," Patricia told Robert while Grace was in the restroom. "Even when we were married, you were haunted. Now I understand why. You weren't mourning just Melissa. You were mourning a family you never knew you'd lost." She turned to Grace when she returned. "Your father is a good man who makes terrible decisions when he's afraid. Don't let him push you away because he thinks it's for your own good. He did that once already, and look how that turned out. Sterling Industries faced its biggest crisis when a rival company, Nexus Corp, attempted a hostile takeover. The stress was immense, with Robert working 20-hour days to fight off the attack." Grace watched her father deteriorate under the pressure, remembering her mother's words about how ambition had consumed him. But this time was different. Robert was fighting not for ego, but for his employees, for the company culture he'd built, for the legacy he wanted to leave Grace. Grace threw herself into the fight, her brilliant analysis finding weaknesses in Nexus's financial position that the experienced team had missed. Working side by side through sleepless nights, father and daughter developed a synchronicity that surprised them both. When they finally defeated the takeover attempt, Robert's first words were, "We make a good team." Grace smiled. "Mom always said we would, if we ever got the chance." The stress of the takeover fight took its toll. Robert collapsed during a board meeting, his heart racing irregularly. Grace rode with him in the ambulance, holding his hand and realizing how much she'd come to love this complicated man who was her father. The diagnosis was exhaustion and stress-induced arrhythmia. Treatable, but a warning. "You need to slow down," the doctor said firmly. "Your body is 52, not 25. Grace stayed by his bedside, and in the quiet hospital room, they had conversations they'd never had before. "I'm afraid," Robert admitted, "not of dying, but of wasting the time we have left. I wasted 26 years already." "Then don't waste any more," Grace said simply. "Mom used to say the past is written, but the future is a blank page. Write something better." Robert's health scare changed everything. He promoted Miranda to co-CEO, sharing responsibilities he'd once guarded jealously. He started leaving work at reasonable hours, spending evenings with Grace, learning to cook, and discovering the city beyond his office. Grace introduced him to her life, her friends, her favorite bookstore, the hiking trails she loved. "You're different," Miranda observed. "Lighter, somehow." Robert nodded. "I spent 30 years building an empire. Now I'm building a family. It's infinitely harder and infinitely more rewarding." He started therapy, working through the guilt and regret of lost years. The therapist helped him understand that Melissa's choice, while painful, came from love and fear in equal measure. "You can't change the past," she said, "but you can choose how it shapes your future." Grace started dating David Park, a software engineer from a rival company. Robert's protective instincts went into overdrive, running background checks and interrogating the poor man over dinner. "Dad, stop," Grace said firmly. "You're being ridiculous." "I'm being a father," Robert countered. 26 years late, but still. David handled the scrutiny with grace and humor, winning Robert over despite himself. He saw how David looked at Grace, with the same wonder Robert had once felt for Melissa. "Don't be an idiot like I was," Robert told David privately. "If you love her, really love her, don't let ambition or fear or anything else get in the way. Choose her, every time." David nodded solemnly. "I intend to, sir." While organizing foundation paperwork, Grace discovered something that shattered her. Medical records showing Melissa had refused treatment that might have extended her life because it would have bankrupted Grace's future. She'd chosen to die sooner so her daughter could live without debt. Grace broke down in Robert's office, sobbing with rage and grief. "She didn't have to die," Grace cried. "If you'd known, if she'd told you, you could have helped. Your money could have saved her." Robert held his daughter as she raged against the cruel irony. His billions sitting useless, while the woman he'd loved died for want of money she was too proud to ask for. "Your mother made her choices," he said gently. "Right or wrong, they came from love. We can't save her now, but we can save others. The foundation will make sure no one else faces that choice." Grace agreed to her first public interview, wanting to control the narrative that had spun wild for months. She sat with a respected journalist, Robert, beside her, and told their story with composure and honesty. "My mother made a decision she thought was right," Grace said. "My father built an empire while unknowingly missing his daughter's childhood. There are no villains here, only humans making imperfect choices with imperfect information." The interview went viral, but not as scandal, as a story of redemption, of family found and rebuilt. Letters poured in from other secret children, other lost parents, other families torn apart by pride and miscommunication. Grace read every one, sometimes crying, sometimes calling Robert to share particularly moving stories. They started a podcast together, talking about their journey and interviewing others who'd found family in unexpected ways. David proposed to Grace on the anniversary of the day she'd been attacked in the parking garage. "That horrible night led to the best thing in your life, finding your father," he said. "I want to take all your horrible nights and transform them into beautiful mornings." Grace said yes, and Robert cried openly when she asked him to walk her down the aisle. The wedding was small but perfect, held in the garden of the house Robert bought specifically because it had the rose garden Melissa had always dreamed of. Grace wore her mother's wedding dress, altered to fit, with Melissa's photo in a locket around her neck. "She's here," Grace whispered to Robert as they prepared to walk down the aisle. "I can feel her." "She's in you," Robert replied. "Every time you smile, every time you stand up for what's right, every time you choose love over fear, that's Melissa, living on through you." 2 years after discovering Grace, Robert made a shocking announcement. He was stepping down as CEO, recommending Grace as his successor. The board was stunned, some supportive, others skeptical. Grace had risen to Chief Strategy Officer through her own merit, but CEO was a massive leap. "She's not ready," Harrison Pike argued. "She's brilliant," Robert countered, "innovative, empathetic, and has the respect of the entire workforce. She's more ready than I was at her age." The board voted, narrowly approving Grace's appointment. She took the position not as Robert Sterling's daughter, but as Grace Winters Park, a leader in her own right. First act was to implement profit sharing for all employees. Her second was to mandate that executives work 1 day a month in entry-level positions to stay connected to their workforce. Stepping back from Sterling Industries, Robert discovered a life he'd never known existed. He taught at the university, sharing real-world experience with eager students. He expanded the foundation, personally mentoring single parents pursuing education. He learned to paint, badly but joyfully, and displayed his terrible watercolors proudly in his simplified apartment. "You're happy?" Grace observed one Sunday dinner. "Actually happy, not success happy or achievement happy, but content happy," Robert nodded. "I spent 50 years chasing something I couldn't name. Turns out it was this. Family dinners, terrible paintings, watching my daughter exceed my wildest dreams, and knowing that when I die, I'll leave behind more than money. I'll leave behind love." Grace announced her pregnancy at Sunday dinner, placing the ultrasound photo next to Robert's plate without a word. He stared at it for a long moment, then began to cry, great heaving sobs that shook his entire body. "A grandchild," he whispered. "I get to be a grandfather." Grace and David had decided to name the baby Melissa if it was a girl, Robert if a boy. "No," Robert said firmly. "Not Robert. This child should have their own name, their own path. The past has controlled our family enough. They settled on Alexander for a boy, Luna for a girl. New names for a new generation, unburdened by history but informed by its lessons." The call came at 2 a.m. on a rainy November night, exactly 3 years after the attack that had changed everything. Grace was in labor, and Robert rushed to the hospital, finding dark humor in the parallel. This time, though, he was rushing toward joy rather than fear. Luna Melissa Winters Park was born at sunrise, screaming and perfect. As Robert held his granddaughter for the first time, he thought about cycles and circles, about Melissa dying alone while he lived in ignorance, about Grace cleaning his offices while he sat oblivious to their connection. Now here was Luna, starting fresh, born into a family that had learned the hard way that love was more important than pride, that truth was better than secrets, and that it's never too late to become the person you were meant to be. Robert wrote Luna a letter for her 18th birthday, to be held in trust until then. "Dear Luna," it began, "by the time you read this, you'll know our family's story, the secrets, the lies, the lost years, and the found love. I want you to know that every mistake, every wrong turn, every moment of pain led us to you. Your grandmother Melissa, whom you'll never meet, but whose strength runs in your veins, chose isolation to give your mother freedom. Your mother chose courage to find her father. I chose, finally, to put family over empire. These choices, imperfect as they were, created the world you're born into. One where you're surrounded by love, where you'll never doubt your worth, where you'll know that success means nothing without someone to share it with." As CEO, Grace transformed Sterling Industries into something neither she nor Robert had imagined. She created an entire division dedicated to providing technology solutions for single-parent households, affordable education platforms, and flexible work systems that allowed parents to balance career and family. The board initially resisted, but the profits were undeniable. It turned out that solving real problems for real people was excellent business. "You've made Sterling Industries about more than money," Robert told her proudly. "You've made it about meaning," Grace smiled. "I learned from the best, not from the CEO who built an empire, but from the father who gave it up to build a family. That's the lesson I want Luna to learn. That true success is measured not in what you accumulate, but in what you contribute. Not in what you achieve, but in who you lift up along the way through the foundation's work." Robert and Grace managed to track down several of Melissa's old friends from Boston, people she'd cut off when she'd disappeared. They organized a memorial service, 3 years after her death, but right on time for healing. People shared stories of Melissa that neither Robert nor Grace had heard. Her kindness, her humor, her fierce intelligence, and yes, her stubborn pride. An elderly professor from MIT stood up and said, "Melissa Parker was my brightest student. But more than that, she was proof that love and ambition could coexist. She just never figured out how to make them work together." Looking at you two, he gestured to Robert and Grace. "I think she finally did. Just not in the way anyone expected." That night, Robert and Grace stood at Melissa's grave together for the first time. "We did it, Mom," Grace whispered. "We found each other. We found our way home." At 70, Robert was diagnosed with early-stage Parkinson's. He faced it with the equanimity of someone who'd finally learned what mattered. "I'm not afraid," he told Grace. "I've had 18 years with you that I never thought I'd get. I've seen you become a leader, a wife, a mother. I've held my granddaughter and will hopefully hold more grandchildren. If my body fails me now, at least my life hasn't." He spent his remaining strong years writing, not a business memoir, but a love letter to the family he'd found. The book, titled The Janitor's Secret, became a bestseller, with all proceeds going to the foundation. In interviews, Robert always said the same thing. "I spent half my life building an empire of money and half building an empire of love. Guess which one will outlast me?" Luna grew up knowing her family's story, wearing it not as burden but as strength. At 16, she worked in Sterling Industries' mailroom over summer break, insisting on starting at the bottom like her mother had. She had Robert's strategic mind, Grace's mathematical brilliance, and Melissa's fierce independence. But more than that, she had what previous generations had lacked, the wisdom to know that love and ambition could coexist, that success and family weren't mutually exclusive. "Grandpa," she said one day, visiting Robert in his assisted living facility, where he lived with dignity despite his progressing condition, "thank you for saving Mom that night. Without that moment, none of us would exist." Robert, his hands shaking but his mind still sharp, smiled. "No, Luna. Your mother saved me. She showed me that everything I'd built meant nothing without someone to share it with. The attack was just the universe's way of introducing us properly." Robert Sterling died on a November night, rain pattering against the windows. Just as it had the night he'd saved Grace 30 years earlier, he was surrounded by family. Grace, David, Luna, her younger brother Robert Jr., and the extended family of employees, foundation recipients, and friends who'd become part of their rebuilt world. His last words were for Grace. "Tell your mother. I understand now. Love isn't about holding on or letting go. It's about choosing, again and again, to put someone else's happiness alongside your own. She chose to let me go. I chose to find you. You chose to forgive us both. And in the end, we all chose love, just in different ways and different times." Grace held his hand as he passed, whispering, "We'll take it from here, Dad. Rest now. You've earned it. The empire Robert Sterling built would eventually be absorbed by other companies, his name forgotten in corporate halls. But the foundation would continue for generations. The families he'd helped would tell their children about the CEO who learned to be human. And somewhere, in whatever comes after, Robert and Melissa would finally have the conversation they'd avoided for 26 years, with their daughter's forgiveness as the bridge between them. Grace stood in the same parking garage where it had all began, now renovated and bright, but still holding memories in its concrete bones. Luna, 21 and fresh from MIT, stood beside her. This is where it happened. Luna asked. Where Grandpa saved you. Where we saved each other, Grace corrected. That's the thing about family, Luna. Sometimes we find each other in the most unexpected ways, at the most unexpected times. Your grandfather thought he was saving a janitor from attackers. I thought I was hiding from a father who never knew I existed. But really, we were both just trying to find our way home to each other. It just took us 26 years and a violent night to realize that home isn't a place. It's the people who refuse to let you face your battles alone, who see your worth when the world tries to diminish it, who choose love, even when pride would be easier. That's the legacy of the Sterling family. Not the billions, not the company, but the truth that it. That's it for today, family. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button and turn on your post notification as we share stories like this every week. Until next time, stay blessed.